Um, Nathaniel, you've recently entered the podcast space.
Mm.
What has that taught you about the art of conversation and the art of listening? Do you have any takeaways from that?
Well, I think it's important to the way that you structure questions sometimes has to be aware of the flow of the conversation. So
Mm.
whether this is in an interview with a colleague or whether this is in, thinking how to analogize some of these skills to, say, facilitating a student's discussion, is that you can't always anticipate where the discussion might be going. But
Yeah.
for it to be a true sort of organic conversation, you have to be willing not just to look through your list of questions, but
Mhm.
to be really listening to what the answers are and how those answers might be connected together. And if we want to be really good at teaching that, we actually need to give our colleagues or in PLC or planning sessions, for example, you can have protocols and things like that, but also with our students, teaching them common ways of making connections to what's been said before and not just putting your hand up and waiting for your turn to say exactly what you wanted to say and not listening to anything else that's occurred. So I think for me the podcast has been a chance of, there's a few moments where we've asked a question and then the guest on the podcast has wanted to already launch into something else. So it's almost better not to anticipate exactly what that expert who you've got on the show is going to say. Starting with a broad, open-ended question might be the best thing because it allows them to take the path that they're wanting to, and then you can hone in later. So there's been a few moments where we're like, what do you think about this particular thing? And then I've been like, well, let me tell you the background on this first. And it's it's a slightly disjunctive because it sort of says, oh, my question didn't really land because now they've answered a different question. But I think that's the nature of human interaction, and you get better at, I think, those kinds of things through conversations like this, but those informal conversations you might have in your everyday life. You can get better at not necessarily always feeling like you're directing where the conversation's going next, but having a true interaction where we don't know where it's going to go, which is
Yeah.
the cool part.
So, Nathaniel, tell me about the podcast. What's it called?
Mm.
Why should, and there will be a link to the podcast in the show notes, but why should people click on that link and add it to their playlist?
So here's the 1 minute pitch, so I don't steal too much of the
That's
time
okay. You
today.
take as much time as you need.
All right, so the quick version is it's called Chalk Dust. It's essentially discussions with my colleague Rebecca Birch, who's a secondary English teacher. I'm primarily primary, but also some sort of middle school as well. And we take essentially classroom footage of great teaching happening in the classroom, and we try and do what I always find fascinating is the commentation about the action. So commentators on sport will get really into what's happening on the field and sort of analyze it play by play and go back and replay it or show it in slow motion. So what I've tried to do with Rebecca is create that same experience bot for the art of teaching. And I think that's the cool thing that we've tried to do. And as a result of having some expert sort of guests on, we've been able to get their thoughts on their own teaching or their colleagues' teaching. So it's essentially a chance to really unpack what great teaching could look like, how it could be used in your classroom, or hone your skills as a coach or as an observer of practice, and essentially make sure that we're not just talking about stuff, we're also looking and conferring on what we think is great practice.